Back in the Depression, folks had to get pretty creative to survive the cold winters, and they didn't have the luxury of central heating or electric blankets. Instead, they made do with what they had, using some pretty smart tricks that still work today. Whether you're trying to save energy, go old school, or just curious about how people got by, these simple methods will keep you cozy without relying on modern tech. So grab a warm drink, get comfy, and let's jump into these Depression-era tips. Layering clothing. Hey, you ever heard the phrase, dress for the weather you want, not the weather you have? Well, during the Great Depression, majority of people didn't have much choice. They had to get creative with the clothes they had. Instead of cranking up the heat, because, well, there wasn't any, they mastered the art of layering. The trick was simple: wear multiple layers to trap body heat and create insulation. It started with a thin, moisture-wicking base layer, usually something like wool or flannel, followed by thicker sweaters, vests, or coats, and topped off with something wind-resistant if they had it. The more layers, the toastier they stayed. And let's not forget the importance of covering extremities. Wool socks, mittens, scarves, and even homemade ear warmers were absolute lifesavers. Some people even wore hats indoors because a good chunk of body heat escapes through the head. If you've ever bundled up in an oversized hoodie and blanket at home, you've already taken a page from their playbook. So, next time you're tempted to complain about the cold, just remember, your great-grandparents were out here layering up with whatever they had and making it work. When it came to staying warm, layering wasn't the only trick in the book. There was also a little help from hot water bottles, which offered some relief when the cold just wouldn't let up. Hot water bottles. Let's be real, there is nothing worse than sliding into freezing sheets at night. But during the Depression era, people had a simple yet genius way to keep warm. Hot water bottles. These weren't always the fancy rubber ones we see today. Sometimes, they were just glass bottles filled with hot water, tightly wrapped in cloth to avoid burns. Others used fabric pouches filled with heated grains like rice or beans, which radiated warmth for hours. At night, families would place these makeshift heaters at the foot of their beds or under blankets to create a cozy sleeping environment. And the best part? Unlike an electric blanket that shuts off after a few hours, these heat sources slowly released warmth all night long. Some people even tucked them into their coats during the day to stay warm while working outside. So, if you ever find yourself without power in the middle of winter, just boil some water, pour it into a secure container, and enjoy some old-school warmth. Bonus points if you use it to warm up your hands before bed. It's like a mini heater in your pocket. If hot water bottles weren't enough, they also had a clever way to keep the heat where it belonged. By hanging heavy curtains or blankets over their windows and doors. Hanging heavy curtains or blankets. If you've ever felt a cold draft sneaking through your windows, you know how quickly it can turn a warm room into an icebox. Now imagine dealing with that without central heating. People in the Great Depression had a simple fix. They covered their windows and doors with thick blankets, rugs, or even newspaper to trap heat inside. Heavy curtains weren't just for decoration. They were essential survival tools. During the day, they would open curtains to let the sunlight naturally heat the room. But as soon as the sun set, everything got covered up again. Some families even hung blankets over doorways to keep heat concentrated in one or two rooms rather than wasting it on an entire house. And let's not forget about DIY window insulation. People stuffed cracks with rags or old clothes to block out the wind. It might not be as fancy as modern double-pane windows, but it worked. So, if your place ever starts feeling chilly, don't hesitate to throw an extra blanket over the windows. Your ancestors did it first, and they knew what they were doing. But you'd be shocked to see how creative they became with their living space. Instead of trying to heat an entire house, families would shrink their living area to one cozy room, often centered around the fireplace, creating a smaller living space. Back in the day, people weren't heating their entire homes like we do now. Instead, they made their living space smaller to keep warmth concentrated. Think of it like camping inside your house. Families would move their sleeping areas into one central room, often near the fireplace or stove. They'd push beds together, lay down thick rugs, and even hang blankets around the space to create a heat-trapping cocoon. This setup wasn't just practical, it was also a way to stay connected. Imagine huddling up with your family, telling stories, and sharing warmth under layers of blankets. Sure, personal space might have been limited, but it was better than freezing. People also used furniture placement strategically, keeping beds and chairs away from cold walls or windows. And if they had a tent or canopy bed, even better. It helped trap body heat, making it feel much warmer than the rest of the house. So, if you ever lose power in the winter, don't spread out, stick together. Your great-grandparents did it, and it kept them warm through some of the toughest times. Of course, keeping warm didn't just happen through blankets and insulation. It was also about how people used their cooking methods during the Depression era. Cooking indoors with wood stoves. Back in the day, the kitchen was truly the heart of the home, and the wood-burning stove played a starring role. These stoves weren't just for whipping up hearty meals. They doubled as a primary heat source. Families would gather around, soaking in the warmth while a pot of stew simmered away. The beauty of a wood stove is its dual functionality, providing both sustenance and heat. Cooking hearty meals like soups and stews not only nourished the body, but also added moisture and warmth to the air. Plus, the act of chopping wood kept folks active, generating body heat and ensuring a steady fuel supply. In today's world, while many homes lack traditional wood stoves, the principle remains. Utilizing a single appliance for multiple purposes can be both efficient and comforting. And let's be honest, there's something undeniably cozy about the crackling sound of wood and the aroma of a home-cooked meal wafting through the air. Creating DIY insulation. Resourcefulness was a hallmark of the Depression era. When traditional insulation materials were scarce or too costly, people turned to everyday items to keep the cold at bay. Newspapers, for instance, were more than just a source of news. They became makeshift insulation. Families would line walls, floors, and even stuff window gaps with layers of newspaper to trap heat. Similarly, old clothes and rags found new life as draft stoppers. By rolling them up and placing them at the base of doors or windows, they effectively blocked chilly drafts. Quilting also became more than a craft. Stitching together fabric scraps not only provided warmth, but also added personal stories and memories to each piece. These DIY methods showcased a blend of creativity and practicality, turning potential waste into valuable tools for warmth. Today, while we have advanced insulation materials, the principle of repurposing and maximizing available resources remains a valuable lesson in sustainability and ingenuity. When materials were tight, people got creative with DIY insulation. Using everyday items like newspapers and old clothes, they found ways to trap heat and keep their homes warm without spending a dime. When trying to stay warm during the Depression era, sometimes the best heat source was each other. Utilizing body heat. In times when heating resources were limited, people recognized the value of body heat. Sharing beds wasn't just about conserving space, it was a strategic move to stay warm. Siblings would bunk together, and sometimes even multiple generations would share sleeping quarters, allowing shared body heat to keep everyone cozy. During waking hours, families would huddle under shared blankets or quilts while engaging in activities like reading or storytelling. This closeness fostered not only warmth, but also deepened familial bonds. Even pets played a role. A cat or dog snuggled close added an extra layer of warmth. The concept was simple. The more bodies in close proximity, the warmer the space. In today's individualistic society, we often seek personal space. But during the Depression, togetherness was a practical and emotional necessity. It's a poignant reminder of the strength and warmth found in human connection. As warmth became a precious commodity, people also relied on heating bricks or stones. Before the convenience of modern heating pads or electric blankets, people turned to natural materials to provide lasting warmth. Bricks or stones were commonly used due to their ability to retain heat. The process was straightforward. Heat the bricks or stones in a fireplace or wood stove until they were sufficiently warm. Once heated, they were carefully wrapped in cloth or old towels to prevent burns and then placed at the foot of the bed or used as foot warmers during the day. These makeshift heaters would radiate warmth for hours, making cold nights more bearable. Some even placed them under dining tables, covering the table with a heavy cloth to trap the heat. creating a cozy nook for family meals. This method was an ingenious way to utilize available resources, turning simple elements into effective tools for warmth. It's a testament to the creativity and resilience of those living through the Depression era, finding comfort in the simplest of means. The next method involved making use of a readily available source, utilizing passive solar heating. Back in the day, folks didn't have the luxury of modern heating systems, so they turned to the most natural heat source available, the sun. By strategically using passive solar heating, they could warm their homes without any extra fuel. During daylight hours, curtains and blinds were drawn open to allow sunlight to pour in through south-facing windows, naturally heating the interior spaces. As evening approached, these windows were covered with heavy curtains or blankets to trap the accumulated warmth inside. This simple yet effective method made a noticeable difference in indoor temperatures. Additionally, dark-colored rugs or wall hangings were used to absorb and radiate heat, further enhancing the home's warmth. It's a testament to how a bit of ingenuity and an understanding of natural elements can create a cozy living environment, even in the harshest of times. After making use of natural heat sources, people also found that physical activity played a big role in staying warm. Engaging in physical activity. When the chill set in and heating options were scarce, people knew that one of the quickest ways to warm up was through physical activity. Engaging in household chores like chopping wood, scrubbing floors, or even vigorous knitting sessions not only accomplished necessary tasks, but also got the blood flowing and raised body temperatures. Families would often have impromptu dance sessions, play active games, or take brisk walks to generate heat. These activities served the dual purpose of keeping them warm and lifting their spirits during tough times. It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to combat the cold is simply to get moving. So, next time you're feeling the chill, consider a little exercise or a dance around the living room. It worked wonders back then and still does today. Along with staying active, people also got creative with homemade draft stoppers. Utilizing homemade draft stoppers. During the Great Depression, families couldn't afford to let precious heat escape through drafts. To combat this, they crafted simple yet effective draft stoppers using materials they had on hand. Old socks, fabric scraps, or even newspaper were repurposed into makeshift draft blockers. By rolling these materials and placing them at the base of doors and windows, they effectively sealed gaps, preventing cold air from entering and warm air from escaping. This DIY approach not only conserved heat, but also showcased the era's ingenuity and resourcefulness. Today, while we have access to commercial draft stoppers, creating your own can be a fun and sustainable project that pays homage to the past. Building on the resourcefulness of the time, people also used reflective materials to maximize heat. Using reflective materials. Reflective materials were another clever tool in the Depression-era arsenal against the cold. Families would line the backs of radiators with aluminum foil or even shiny metal trays to reflect heat back into the room, enhancing warmth without additional energy consumption. This simple yet effective method made the most of existing heat sources, ensuring that every bit of warmth was utilized efficiently. In today's world, while we have more advanced heating systems, the principle of reflecting and retaining heat remains relevant. Using reflective materials can still be a cost-effective way to boost your home's warmth, especially in areas where heating costs are a concern. As part of conserving heat, families also created a centralized living space. Creating a centralized living space. In times of limited resources, families often consolidated their living spaces to conserve heat. By gathering in a single room, they could focus their heating efforts, making the environment warmer and more comfortable. This practice not only conserved energy, but also fostered a sense of togetherness and community. Families would share stories, play games, and engage in activities that kept them close, both physically and emotionally. This approach highlights the importance of human connection in overcoming adversity. In today's context, while we may not need to consolidate rooms for warmth, the idea of spending quality time together remains a powerful way to create a cozy and supportive environment. Staying warm at night was all about thick quilts, layered blankets, and even homemade comforters such as blankets. Utilizing insulated bedding. When it came to bedtime, Depression-era families knew the importance of insulated bedding. They would use heavy quilts, layered blankets, and even homemade comforters filled with feathers or down to trap body heat. Some families even used flannel sheets, which provided extra warmth compared to regular cotton. The goal was to create a warm cocoon that would keep the cold at bay throughout the night. This practice underscores the importance of quality sleep and comfort, even in challenging times. Today, while we have access to modern heating systems, the principle of using insulated bedding remains a simple and effective way to ensure a warm and restful night's sleep. Stone or brick heat storage. Ever heard of the passive heat storage trick? During the Depression, families got creative with stones and bricks to keep their homes warm at night. The idea was simple. Place stones or bricks around the house during the day to absorb heat from the sun or a nearby fire. Then when the temperature dropped at night, those same stones or bricks would slowly release the heat, keeping the house toasty. It's like nature's version of a space heater, no electricity required. Imagine sitting by the fire all day, feeling the warmth radiating from the stones you strategically placed around your living room. Even today, people still use similar techniques, like heat-retaining stones in fireplaces or DIY thermal mass systems, to harness the sun's power. If you've got a fireplace or even just some big chunky stones around, consider putting them to work. Ever heard of using stones or bricks to store heat? Tune in to find out more. Making homemade heat pads. Back in the day, people didn't have microwaves to heat things up, so they got resourceful. They'd fill socks or small fabric bags with rice, beans, or even oats. When placed near the stove or a fire, these heat pads would soak up all that warmth and slowly release it to keep your hands or feet nice and toasty. It's like creating your own little pocket of warmth that you can take anywhere, whether you're sitting by the fire or braving a chilly house. Want to make your own? All you need is a sock, some rice or beans, and a little creativity. Not only is it practical, but it's also a great way to use up materials you already have around the house. During the Depression, families would use metal plates to catch heat from fires and spread it around. It's a simple, effective way to stay warm without extra energy. Heat-catching metal plates. Let's talk about a trick that was known during the Depression era. Heat-catching metal plates. People back then would place metal trays or baking sheets near their fire to absorb and spread the heat throughout the room. The metal would absorb the warmth and then radiate it, like a mini heat wave. So, imagine sitting in a room with a fire going and feeling that extra warmth coming from the metal plate nearby. It's an easy way to maximize the heat from your fire without burning more wood or wasting energy. You don't even need anything fancy. A simple baking tray can do the job. You can still find this method used today in small wood-burning stoves or heat exchangers that help distribute heat evenly. Okay, let's get a little creative here with cupping the air. Sounds weird, right? But stick with me. Cupping the air. Cupping the air was a neat trick people used back in the day to make sure the warm air from a fire or stove wasn't escaping into the atmosphere. They would take large pots or containers, place them near the heat source, and the idea was that these containers would trap and hold the heated air. This trapped warm air would then be distributed more evenly throughout the room. Think of it like collecting warm air in a big cozy bowl and then letting it spread around you. You can even do this today with big pots, metal containers, or even DIY systems around your wood-burning stove to keep the warmth right where you need it. Ever thought about how something as simple as wool could keep you warm? Woolen mittens and scarves were a go-to for staying cozy back then. Handmade woolen mittens and scarves. Handmade woolen mittens and scarves were lifesavers during the Depression era. Seriously, these items were like little mobile heating devices. People knew that wool was one of the best materials to trap heat, so they knitted or crocheted their own mittens, scarves, and hats. These cozy creations kept people warm while they worked, walked outside, or just hung around the house. Wool has a unique ability to retain heat, even when it gets wet, making it ideal for cold weather. Imagine sitting by a crackling fire, wearing a scarf your grandmother knitted. You can feel the warmth and the love wrapped up in those stitches. Even today, if you want to stay warm, there's nothing like a handmade wool scarf to keep the chill at bay. It's a little piece of history that's just as useful now as it was back then. When it comes to staying warm, we often forget about the little gaps around doors and windows. During the Depression, people used whatever they had, old clothes, socks, newspapers, to seal up those drafts. Sealing entryways. If there's one thing we all know, it's that drafts can seriously mess with the warmth of your home. During the Depression, folks got creative with anything they could find to seal up gaps around doors and windows. Old clothes, newspapers, rags, and even socks were put to work as makeshift draft stoppers. By stuffing them into cracks and crevices, they could prevent the cold air from sneaking in and the warm air from sneaking out. This simple trick was one of the most effective ways to maintain a cozy home. If you've ever seen an old house with a strip of fabric hanging across the door, you've seen this method in action. You'd be amazed at how much heat you can trap just by sealing up the smallest openings. So, next time you notice a draft, don't just blame it on the old windows. Use some of that fabric lying around to keep things snug. When you think of staying warm, what's better than sitting by the fire? Sitting close to the hearth. There's something magical about sitting close to a fire, especially when you need to stay warm. During the Depression, the hearth wasn't just a place to cook meals. It was the heart of the home. Families would gather around the fire to stay warm, chat, and share stories. It was a place of comfort during the coldest months when the temperature outside was bone-chilling. But this wasn't just about socializing. It was about survival. Sitting near the hearth maximized the warmth in a room, helping people heat up without relying on expensive fuel. Even today, in homes with fireplaces, we follow the same logic. The closer you are to the fire, the warmer you'll be. It's the kind of cozy setup that not only kept people physically warm, but emotionally fulfilled too. When the weather outside is brutal, there's nothing like gathering around a hearth. Whether you're in a traditional home with a fireplace or just curling up next to a space heater. Ever thought a kettle could warm more than just water? In the Depression, it was an easy way to stay warm without extra fuel. Using a cast iron kettle. Sometimes, it's the little things that make a big difference. Cast iron kettles were the unsung heroes of Depression-era homes. People would keep a cast iron kettle or pot on the stove, letting it heat up slowly. These heavy-duty pieces of cookware could absorb and store heat for hours, which they'd then release into the room. It's like having a built-in heater without the need for gas or electricity. People loved this method because it was low maintenance and cost-effective. Even though it may sound old-fashioned, many people today still swear by using cast iron kettles for retaining heat, especially in off-grid setups or homes with wood stoves. Just think about it. You've got that kettle gently radiating warmth for hours, giving you that steady, comforting heat without any high-tech gadgets. So if you've got an old kettle sitting around, it might just be your ticket to some cozy warmth. Need to warm up a room fast? Small stove heaters were the go-to. Small stove heaters. All right, let's talk about small stove heaters. Super handy for heating up a room without needing an entire central heating system or loads of electricity. In the Depression era, people would use anything from tiny stoves to makeshift metal cans to create localized heat. These small stoves could be placed in living spaces like bedrooms or kitchens, so you could enjoy warmth where you spend the most time. And the best part? You didn't need a massive investment to get one going. You could even make your own with scraps of metal or old cans. People got really creative, and it worked. Even today, small stove heaters are super popular in off-grid homes or places where it's tough to get the big systems running. So, if you're looking for a budget-friendly way to heat up a small space, a little stove or makeshift heater might be just the thing. Tired of icy winds creeping into your home? Depression-era families had a fix, planting trees and shrubs as natural windbreaks. It was a simple way to block the cold before it even reached their walls. Protecting against wind. During the Depression era, staying warm without gas or electricity meant getting creative. One smart trick people used was creating natural windbreaks around their homes. This is essentially using trees, shrubs, or tall plants to block the cold wind before it hit your house. Sounds simple, but it was super effective. By planting rows of evergreens like pines or firs, families created a shield that helped keep the wind at bay and, in turn, kept their homes warmer. Not only did this block the cold, but it also helped preserve heat inside. By strategically placing these windbreaks a few feet from your home, you could slow down the wind's momentum, stopping that chilly draft from sneaking in through the cracks around your doors and windows. It's a natural way to insulate and maximize your warmth. And these windbreaks did more than just protect from the wind. They also gave privacy, cut down on noise, and were perfect for wildlife. Moving on, what's better than sipping on a warm beverage when it's freezing cold? Drinking warm beverages. During the Depression, people didn't have modern heating, so drinking something hot was an easy way to warm up. Picture it. You're holding a mug of steaming tea or coffee, and that warmth spreads through your body, making you feel cozy inside. It's not just about the taste. It's a simple yet effective way to keep your body temperature up. The warmth from the drink could almost feel like a small comfort amidst the hardships, offering a moment of relief. Back then, they didn't have fancy drinks, just basic tea or homemade hot cocoa. Some even used hot water that was kept on the stove all day. It wasn't just a treat, it was a necessity to make sure they stayed warm throughout the day. So next time you're cold, grab a hot drink and remember how it kept people warm during tough times. It's a timeless, simple solution that still works today. And that's a wrap. 25 ways people stayed warm during the Depression without gas or electricity. From layering up to getting creative with heat sources, these methods show that even in tough times, there's always a way to stay cozy and make the most of what you have. It's a great reminder that with a little resourcefulness, you can handle any cold snap that comes your way. So next time you're feeling chilly, give one of these techniques a try. You might be surprised at how well they work, even today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.